Hey guys, it's Matt, welcome to Speed Tutor, and this is going to be the world's best main menu tutorial that you have ever seen. Okay, so it might have been a slight exaggeration because there is a lot of tutorials online to show you how to make menus, but this is going to be the quintessential, I'm going to try and make it the quintessential, very best step-by-step guide with annotations that you'll be able to look in the timeline, and I'll split it up into specific sections between being able to design all of the menu, use and work with all the UIs, be able to open and close specific menus, we're going to be able to control buttons, toggles, sliders, we're going to update text next to sliders when we pull the slider across, we're going to look at saving the preferences into PlayerPrefs, then every time you load your game or load your menu, we're going to load those preferences, and then I'm going to show you how that you can customize specific UI elements in your menu. I'd really love to know from everybody how long it took you to make your first main menu, and if you do learn anything from this video today, please let me know in the comments. So just before we get started, if everybody who watches this can leave a like, even a comment, anything like that, it would really help out the video, so thank you so much. And we're going to make a main menu similar to this with the customizations, with the different buttons that we can click on. New game, we can bring out pop-out dialogues to be able to choose yes or no, to be able to load a game potentially, to be able to use options, to change graphics settings, to change the sound and audio, to change gameplay, to show controls, an inversion, controller sensitivity setting to defaults, being able to go back, choosing to show you each of the buttons, how they work, opening menus, and being able to save all this data. So we've got a new scene in Unity and you want to get started. So what do we want to do? Our big process, we're going to go to 2D mode by clicking 2D at the top. We're going to right click in the hierarchy, go UI and select canvas. Then we're going to go to the right hand side and go to canvas, and we're going to go scale with screen height. So you're going to scale this with the screen height that you want. So we're going to do this as 1920 by 1080, and that is our resolution that is going to be for our menu, because this is the default resolution that most screens will be on a computer. You want a background for your menu to get it started. So first of all, we can go canvas, right click, UI, and we're just going to choose image. We're going to keep this as this image is selected, click on the anchor points, hold Alt, and in the bottom right we can click that and it will expand to the exact part of our canvas. So when we click on our image, we can add a screenshot or something that we want in the background. If you want this to be dynamic, it could be part of your scene. We can make sure that our image is actually a sprite 2D and UI. When we click on it in the inspector, go back onto our image and we can add this to the slot. And now we have a background, and this is just from my game Left Alone. Now we can change this to menu background as an example. And now what we're going to do is right click on this canvas, we'll go UI and we'll choose panel. And this is just going to be a panel which is going to contain our actual objects that are going to be our menu on the left hand side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this panel the main menu container. So this is going to contain the main menu that we actually have. So now what we're going to do in our main menu container, we can right click this, choose UI and choose image. So this is going to be our new image. It's going to be our one on the left hand side. We can drag this, place it up to the top, we can drag down to the bottom, and we can just scale this across however we want it to physically be. This is perfect, and we can just call this our background underscore UI. We can set this image to black. We don't want it to be a raycast target or anything like that. We can change to a custom image, but I'll show that towards the end. You can select your panel, and we just want to remove the image property from that because we just want it to be just a default property. Then from here, we can also set and anchor its UI property to the left hand side. So it's always here no matter if we scale up or down on the resolution, it's always in exactly the same place. Then we want to create something for maybe a game logo. So we can right click again, choose UI, and choose image. You could place this object in line in the center of the object here. I might just make this 250 by 250. You could set that to its anchor point in the inspector to the top left. We can add an image here, which is going to be my little game logo for Left Alone, and I will just add it into the sprite slot. You could create this as however you want it to be, and we can rename this game logo. Then we want to create a series of buttons that we're going to want to do something. So we can right click, we can choose UI and we can choose button with text mesh pro. And you can import the text mesh essentials if you would like. And now we've got our button here. I'm going to drag this in between both of my objects because with the way that UI is rendered, we need things at the bottom which we want to show on top. So the game logo always has to stay there. So what I did for my object, for my menu, is that this one normally has a button which we can use to highlight, but I wanted to highlight the text. So if we grab the text mesh pro and we just unparent that from the actual button object, delete the button object, go back to the text mesh pro text, we can add a component to that called button. So when we add that, then that becomes interactive. So we can go to the vertex color of our text, change that to white. I'm going to make that bold and I'm going to scale up the text size a little bit more. And we'll make sure it's all the way to the left of our object. And we can leave it looking like so. We can edit the text and call this new game. So you can see that it's slightly too big and we can just scale the text size down until we fit into that box perfectly. You can see now that my text just displays normally. We can set the normal color to just the color we have here. I'm going to set my highlighted color to an orange, like so. I'm just going to click on the little button at the bottom to create and add a new preset. So this will be the color that I can select without having to then select the wheel. So I've got one that I've already set down here. So it can be that color here. And then I'm going to choose my selected color. And that's also going to be the same orange. So that when we go into it and press play, you'll notice that my text now acts as a button just exactly like this. And the font changes like that. So this is now going to be changed to new game button. Then what we're going to do is just duplicate what we've got here. So we've got a new game button. We're going to keep this in line with the other and duplicate again and then duplicate again. So what we're going to have, the second one is going to be our load game button. So we can rename that to load game. We could scale our button very slightly, make sure it's still in line. Change the third one to options settings, whatever you may want, and the bottom one can be exit, and we're going to name the buttons accordingly. So you can see they all share exactly the same. And now, as you can see, when I click on my main menu container, I can just tick this on and off so this can disappear whenever I don't need to be able to interact with any of the buttons. You can find this entire menu system on my Patreon if you want to support the channel. You can find scripts, complete projects, and so much on there. So thank you so much for watching. So from now we want to create a bunch of selection or dialogue options that appear. So when we click one of these things, you don't just want to instantly load a game or create a new game or do something. You want to ask a player before you do it. So then they can accidentally click and go, oh no, I've just started a new game and I didn't mean to. So what you want to do is be able to click, you have a little pop-out menu which can decide, did you really want to start a new game or not? And you click on load game, did you want to load your game? No, then you can go back, or yes. And what we can do is we can collapse this main menu container, right click on our canvas again, choose UI and choose panel. And we're going to rename this new panel to, it's going to be our pop-out dialog container. So this is going to be something that controls the things that will pop out here when we want to choose to create a new game, load a new game, or do something like that. So we can again get rid of the image component. From there, we can right click on the container, choose UI and then choose image. And then we're going to place this in the very center of our screen. We're going to scale this up to around the size that we expect our notification pop out to be. So I will keep it roughly this size, like so. I'm going to change this so it's now a black background. I'm going to select that image and rename that to new game panel dialog. So we're going to be able to have options to change stuff within this. Then I'm going to right click that, choose UI and choose text mesh pro text. We're going to put that to the very center of the object. We'll scale the whole thing out by selecting the very corner and centralize that again. And I'm just going to rename this and write, do you want to start a new game? And then what we can do is we can centralize that and centralize that in the middle. Again, you could scale it up and make it bold, change the font, whatever you want to do with it. And then we can rename that to our top text. Then what we want to do is we want to duplicate that text and we're just going to call this our new game dialog, and we'll just call this our yes button. We'll drag this down to the bottom here. We'll add the button component again. Again, we want to choose the orange for selected and highlighted. Then we'll rename the text to yes. We can scale that in slightly like so, and we can just keep this somewhere around here. We can even scale it up slightly more, so yes. And then we'll duplicate this onto the other side. We'll keep it in line with the other. We'll rename that to no, and then we'll say that new game dialog, and we'll just call this the no button. So now when we actually have this option visible, you can see that we now have a yes and no option when this appears to whether we want to start a new game or not. And then we can just untick this to hide the entire thing. And what we can do, which is really great, is we can just duplicate that thing that menu that we've just created, and we can set that active, and we can just call this one the load game panel dialog. And then we can open that up. The top text could be changed to are you sure you want to load, and then you can leave that as yes and no, and we can just rename those to keep it consistent with everything we do. Load game dialog with in each case, and load game yes and no, and it shares exactly the same things that we want, and we can get rid of that. And then we've got one last one that if we don't have anything to load, we maybe want a little pop out to suggest, oh, we don't have anything to load, so we need to go back. So again, we'll duplicate the load version, add the pop out, and we're just going to call this the no save game dialog, and the top text will say no save file found, and we're just going to get rid of one of these buttons. We're just going to leave the yes one available, and we're just going to make sure that this is just an OK button that we can interact with, and we'll just call this OK game. So it's going to be no save dialog, and we'll change this to OK button, and we can pretty much hide all of these different options. And of course you can adjust any of the styles, scaling, anything you might want to do. But now we need to control how each of these things are going to appear, and then write the script to make a new game button to do something, load game options. So with the UI system, what we can do is you can see on the new game button here, at the bottom of our button component, you've got a list of on-click events. So what you can do is you can press plus, and you can see that it's looking for something to do. So when we click new game, what we expect to do is we can add the main menu container, because we want to turn that off when we select it to bring up our other options, so we can't accidentally click on something else. So we can go to there, we can go to the game object, and we can go set active at the bottom, and we can keep that as false. So this is going to turn off when we click new game, but also we need another runtime event, which is going to be our new game panel dialog, which we'll add. We'll do the same thing. We'll go to game object, and we'll set the bool, that one, to true. So I'll give you an example of this. So now we've set the new game button to do something. So now, new game button, we've highlighted it, clicked it, and you can see, oh, that's disappeared. And then we can move from there. We'll do the same with the load game button. We'll add two events. We'll add itself, which is the main menu container, set that active to false, add the load game dialog, and go on to game object and then set that active. Then we can do the last thing, which is the exit button will be done in code, and the options menu will be created as a separate part of this because it's not something we need to do yet. But then the load game button for no new game will be used soon. So we've linked those up for now. So now we'll create a script to control the different things that we're going to do on our yes and no buttons, and also to be able to control the exit. So we'll right click, create C#, and we're going to call this our menu controller. Open up in Visual Studio. So I'm just going to get rid of the starting methods and just add some, I'm going to add some headings, just keep it all neat. We're going to use two namespaces. So using Unity Engine.ui and then using Unity Engine.scene management, because we're going to want to use some UI components and be able to load scenes when we want to. So in this case, what we're going to do is write public string, and then we're going to put an underscore, and we're going to say that our new game level, this is going to be the thing that we might either load or run at any point when we create a new game. And then we're going to have a private string called level to load, and this is going to be something that will load our level when we need it. So first of all, we need to control that when we press yes on that new game dialog. Public void, which is going to control us and let us be able to click it in the onClick event. We'll call this new game dialog yes, and then we will write scene manager dot load scene, and then in brackets, and then our variable, which was our new game level. So when we click that yes button, we're going to load a scene that we ask it to. Then another public method, which is going to be control our to be able to load, and we'll call this load game dialog yes. So once we've written this method, I will show you this more advanced when we get into all the settings, but for our load game button, I'll show you the basis of it at the moment. So if we say that if our PlayerPrefs, and we're going to use PlayerPrefs to save the data, dot has key, so we're going to check if PlayerPrefs has this particular thing, and then we're going to call this and give it a name of the file that we would save if we were looking to save data, and I will show you how to do it. We're going to look for something called saved level. We're going to add 2 curly brackets below, and then we're going to say from the variable that we created, which was level to load, so we'll say level to load equals PlayerPrefs dot get string, and then in quotes and in brackets we'll say saved level. So we're checking at any moment that when we choose to yes, we want to load a game, we want to check, do we have a file which is called saved level? If we do, we'll say that our local variable of level to load is equal to the PlayerPreferences.get string from this file, and then if you wanted to at any point actually create that into, let's say you had a level that you wanted to push into that file, you can just say PlayerPrefs.set string, and then you can say saved level, and then you put something, and then whatever your level is, you can add in there, and it will save it for you. But this just assumes that we've already got that saved, because this is our load button. Then what we can do is do, like at the top, we can go scene manager dot load scene, and we can specify that it's the level to load. So this will just load that level if we want, and then else is going to be something that we use. And if you don't have anything available to load, then I want to pop up that thing saying there is no save file available, so you'll probably have to click new game. So then what we can do is write serialized field below here for another variable that we're going to get our, and we're going to get our no save game dialog, because this is how we're going to make it appear. Otherwise, we're going to go private game object and have this as no saved game dialog, set that equal to null, like so, and then in this else statement we will say that no saved game dialog.setActive is equal to true. So that's how we're going to control this appearing, because it'll only do it after we've pressed yes. Then under this method, we need to control our exit button, because our options button will come in the future. We'll say public void exit button, then 2 curly brackets below, and then we'll just say application.quit. As easy as that. That's what we love, something really nice and easy. We can go back into Unity, and what we can do is we can just create an empty game object, and we will just call this our menu controller, so we can always access it wherever we want. We could add this to the canvas, but I'm just going to put it here so it's always available. So the new game level is something we can fill in, and the no saved game dialog needs to be a game object, so we can add the no save game dialog into there. The new level that we might want to load, we'll call that level 1. We also need to make sure that we have another level called level 1. So what I could do is go file, create a new scene, and I'm just going to file, save as. So I'll save this new scene as level 1. In my scenes, my previous scene was called sample scene, so we'll name this to main menu. And then what we could do, filed, build settings, and we'll go and add main menu as our first and level 1 as our second. So now, on our new game button, you could see that everything was previously connected. We can go to our new game dialog, and you can see that on our new game dialog, when we press yes, we want to do something. So again, when we press yes, we will add our menu controller to that. We'll go onto the function, choose menu controller, and choose the new game yes button. And I'll make this appear. That on the no, we want to go back to this menu, so we need to hide this one and make this one behind visible. So again, we can add 2 lovely actions. We can set to itself, which is the new game panel dialog. We'll go set active, and we'll set the bool to false. We'll add the main menu container, And we can go to the drop down, go game object, set the boolean to true. So now our new game is set up and ready to go. For our load game option, I'll open up the entire dialog. I'll go to the yes button, and then what I want to do is create an action on the button component. I'll add the menu controller. We'll go to the action, menu controller, and when we'll choose load game dialog yes. Then we'll go to the no button, and we can do pretty much the same as what we did before. Add two prompts again, add itself, go to the game object, set active, false, add the main menu container, game object, set active, true. And then on our OK dialog, we want the OK button. We also, that when we press OK, we also want this to go away and bring this one back. So again, we're going to do the same thing, two things, and we're going to hide itself. So we'll go to the set itself to off, and then we want the main menu container to be visible. So we'll set itself true. Then the last thing we will do is we will go to our exit button, and we will say that we can add another on-click event. We can add our menu controller. We can go to the menu controller, and we just can choose this as exit button. So we're getting everything going. So now if we test it, we can see that new game, all these are highlightable. We could press exit and it would work if we'd built this out. We go to new game, you can see our pop-out works. If we press no, you can see that it goes back. If I press yes, we'll go to our new scene because that's what we wanted to load. And now we'll go back into play mode again. If I go to load game, you can see that pops up. I can press no to go back, go yes. There was no save file found, so I can press OK, and you can see that once I press that button, this menu is still there. We could leave that, but this is the whole purpose of testing things. And then what we actually may need to do is if we go into the load game button, we need to make sure that that hides when we click the yes button. So we had a yes, so we can add another action here and choose and find itself, the load game panel dialog, do the set active, and set that equal to false. So now in this case, we can press play, load game, yes, no game found, press OK, we'll go back to that menu that we created. So now we're going to look at creating our graphics menu. So really this is just going to be a duplicate of what we had here. So we can take our main menu container, which is just this entire object, we can duplicate that entire container, we'll put it above our popouts. Well, I'm just going to hide my main menu container there. You can see that the main menu container that I've just duplicated, we can rename this to options menu container, and you can see everything in here. So we'll open it out and we'll still have the background, the image, the everything. But instead of we'll set new game, we'll change the text to graphics. We'll rename this to our graphics button. We'll do load game, which is going to be set to sound. We'll change the name of our button to correspond with that. We'll change our options value and we'll change this to gameplay. Change the name of our button. I'm going to select the exit button and just put two angled brackets facing backwards, and it can act as our button that goes backwards, and we can just call this our back button. And then in these cases, if we pressed play, you can see that we'd be able to select these as we would, just like our other menu, but we need to connect what they do too. On our main menu container, which we had the options button. We needed this options button on the on click to do something. So again, we can add two actions. We can add the entire menu container as the first one. We'll go to a game object, we'll set active so it'll be false. Then we want to enable our options menu container, which is everything that we want. Again, set active and set that equal to true. And you can see that when we're on our menu, we can go to click options and then we've switched. So again, we can change our back option. Our back option has already the duplicate from our session, from our exit button. So we can just remove that. We can just add another to the on click on our back button, just like before, but we're going to replace it. So in itself, we're going to add itself and we're going to say, we're going to replace the one that we had before, which is a duplicate of the exit button. Set the game object set active, so we'll turn itself off, and then we're going to add the main menu back, game object, set active, and then true. So we'll be able to go back to the main menu if we want. But in these graphics, sound, and gameplay, we need pop-outs to be able to control exactly what we want to do on those menus. You can find this entire menu system on my Patreon if you want to support the channel. You can find scripts, complete projects, and so much on there. So thank you so much for watching. So what we can do is we can just duplicate the popout dialog container. So this is going to be something that's going to, so we're going to act these as our individual setting popout container. These are going to be each of the individual settings that we have. So essentially we can just turn that one off for a second. We can go into our individual settings and you can see that I've got 3 and we'll have 3. We'll have graphics, sound, gameplay. So I'm going to take this middle one for now and we're just going to create a simple one to give you this base example. So we're going to call this one the sound dialog menu. And we're going to open it up. So the top text, you can rename these to however you want. I'm just going to call these audio settings. And then we're going to keep 2 buttons. We're going to have a back, apply, and a reset. So in this case, we're going to rename this one to our sound dialog, and we're going to call this our reset button. So we're just going to name this to reset to default. And we'll just scale this entire thing out. And we're going to turn this text size down. So we've got it like this. And we're just going to put this in our bottom corner. Then we're going to create a sound dialog back button. So in this case, we're just going to call this one back because we need to be able to exit this menu to go back at any point. We'll scale this down slightly and we'll place them both roughly in line with each other. With the reset button, we can anchor it to the bottom left, and with the back button, we can just anchor that to the bottom middle. Then I'm going to duplicate the back button that we've got because this is going to be a base to all our little pop-up menus that we'll create. So then we're going to do the sound dialog, and then I'm just going to call this my apply button because we want to be able to apply the settings that we choose. So I'll drag that across and rename that to apply. So it's something we're going to be able to click if we choose to apply the object that we want. Now, for our audio, we want to control what the audio does. So what we can do is we can right click on this container, choose UI, and then we're just going to choose a slider. So we'll create a slider, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the corner, hold shift, and I'm going to scale it up slightly. And I'm just going to place it in the center as this example. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the handle element. I'm going to select the handle slide area and push that all the way to the end here. And again, I'll do the same with the other side. I'm going to get the fill area and also push that all the way to the end on both sides. And then I'm going to get the fill object. And if your fill object doesn't play, you might just need to play the game again. So what we can do is we can take the left side and push that all the way in there. Take the right side and push it together so we almost get rid of that object, that when we press play, we can slide it all the way in each side, back and forth. What we can do is the top text is from TextMesh Pro. So what we can do is you can duplicate that and we can make that part of our slider. So we can put that as above our background and we can just rename this to our volume. We'll take that, I'm just going to scale this in a lot. And I'm just going to rename this to our volume, and we can again align this with the center of our volume object. What I'm going to do is duplicate that volume text, bring it to this side, and this is going to be the thing that we'll update. So now, instead of that being the volume text, this is going to be our volume slider value. So we can just keep this at now on something like 0.5, for instance, and we can scale this down slightly and just keep it in the center of our object. And then we can anchor all our objects. So the text, we can name that, put that to the right. We can get the entire slider object and keep that in the center and get the volume and put it to the left hand side. Now if we select on our actual, and we'll rename this to volume slider. If we rename the volume slider, you can see that it's got a minimum max value to the actual slider itself. What we can do is we can make sure that that's between 0 and 1. We can set the default value to say 0.5 by default, because maybe that's how high we want our volume at any one time. And then what we can do is go back into our menu script because we want to control what this does. So back in our menu script, I'm just going to write a new header for the volume settings that we need. Then I'm going to write in square brackets serialized field, private text, and this is the volume text value. That's something that we wanted to change on the right hand side. Set that equal to null because it's technically a text box. Then we're going to have square brackets again and say private slider this time and have this as our volume slider. Set that equal to null as well. Then we need to write a method which will control how this will work. So below our last method about the exit button, we can have a public void set volume, and we can have a float, call that volume as the parameter for this method, and say that in this instance I'm just going to change the audio listener. So this will change every single audio that we have in the game. You could use audio mixers to change it, but this is just a core example. So we can do audio listener dot volume is equal to whatever volume we've set. So audio listener is a value of 0 and 1. So if we set it to 0.5, it'll be half the volume of what it would be at any point, and it will turn all our volumes down. But we wanted to update that actual setting that we had, so that text box on the right. So what we need to do is say volume text value dot text is equal to our volume which we've set here, that when we slide the slider, dot toString, and then in brackets, in quotes, we'll put 0.0, so that's a decimal place, and it will allow us, when we specify this value, so whenever we change it, we'll update that so you can see it. In a way, how do we then go about saving that? So we can make it change, but we want to be able to save it. So when we hit our apply button here, we want to do something. So we'll say public void volume apply, and then we'll add 2 brackets, 2 curly brackets below, and say that PlayerPrefs, like I mentioned before in this tutorial, dot set float, and then in quotes and in brackets we can say set a name of the file that we want to save. So we'll call this master volume as an example. Then we'll put in comma. Then we can say that the audio listener dot volume is the thing that we might want to save, because if the audio listener changes, that'll be the volume that we could save. But instead, you could create another variable which remembers what this value is at any point if you wanted to create one yourself, and that will just save this float value into that name of the file. So in any other case, we might want to show a prompt of how we've saved it, or if something is happening when we save it. So we can just create a simple coroutine to make this happen. Is we can write public IE numerator, and then we can call this our confirmation box, and we can just say our confirmation prompt is a variable that we need to create, and we'll say set active is true. We'll say yield return new wait for seconds, and we might want to show this for 2 seconds, for instance, and then confirmation prompt just like this above, and we'll say dot set active is false, like so. Now we just need to take confirmation prompt, put it up at the top here. We'll say that we're looking for a serialized field private game object, and it will be our confirmation prompt, set it equal to null. And then in our volume apply, we can just do start coroutine, open brackets, and we can just call this the confirmation box, 2 brackets and a semicolon. So every time we press apply, we will confirm that that happens. I will mention that this code is appropriate for the normal Unity UI, but if you're using, like me, as an example for Text Mesh Pro, we need to say at the top using TM Pro, and then it won't be a text value anymore. Then for this case, for our Text Mesh Pro, we need to change this to a variable of Text Mesh Pro underscore text. And then we can still do the same code, which is the volume.text, volume text value.text is equal to the same. So we just needed to adjust this value variable for us. Then what we needed to do is we can go back into the menu controller, we can add our slider, and we can add the volume slider value text that we wanted to add. Go to our volume slider itself, add another input or an on-change value, add the menu controller, drop down here, select menu controller and use a dynamic float, which is set volume. And you can see that it was between a value of 0.1 and it starts at 0.5, so we can press play. And now what we can do to check if this apply button will work is I've got an asset called PlayerPrefs editor and utilities, and it shows what our current PlayerPrefs are saved into the current player preferences. So if on our apply button, we just select this apply button, And we need to get rid of the 2 on-click events that we've currently got. We need to press the plus, and we'll add the menu controller again. We can go to the function, we can go menu controller, and we can just say volume apply. And we need to make sure that on our menu controller we've created our confirmation prompt. So if I zoom out of my object slightly, what we could do is on our canvas we can just right click UI and choose an image like so. The image will just appear in the bottom. We could just put it here. We could change this if we wanted, and we could just call this our confirmation image as an example. Go to our menu, add that to our little selection here. We can press play. You need to make sure that you actually adjust this option here, or it won't actually adjust your volume. It'll be whatever default the audio listener is by default at the beginning, so it would be 1, but we will set some defaults when we start. So if we put that at 0.8 and we hit apply, we can get rid of that, and you can see that in my player preference editor, master volume is 0.8.37, so it's a decimal place value of 0.8. And then if you want to change the back button that we have, what we want to do is, in this case, if we've got the back button and we've changed everything, you would often bring up a prompt for the player and say, you might have adjusted the settings, do you want to save? But in this case, we will just go to the bottom, and what I'm going to do is get rid of the 2 on-click events. We'll add 1. We'll add the sound dialog menu, which is there. We're going to set itself to false. We're going to add another, which then should bring back our options menu container, which was the big options container like that, because that's the one we wanted to go back to. And we will set that as game object to true. But then we also want to we'll add the menu controller, and we'll just choose to save everything. So we'll just do volume apply again, because in case we've set everything, we want to just make sure that we can go back and make sure we've saved everything that we've changed, just so that the user doesn't find any issues. And we wanted to change the reset button, so what should we do there? What we can do here, underneath here, we can say serialize field, private float, and we'll call this our default volume. And we'll set that equal to whatever you want your default volume to be, so we can have 1.0f. So this is going to be what it can be whenever, say we might have changed it and we need to reset back to its default, we can do that. So what we can do is we can go below our volume apply, and we can just create a public void, and we just call this our reset button. And then in brackets after the reset button, we can just call this string, and then we just can call this our menu type. And then below here, we can say that if menu type is equal to, and in our case, we're just going to specify a string like it suggested. So I'm just going to call this, if it's audio, which is going to be the audio menu, then what we're going to do is that our audio listener dot volume is going to be equal to our default volume. Our volume slider dot value is going to be equal the default volume, because we want to set that value back on the slider. Then on our volume text value dot text, set that also equal to our default volume dot toString, and then in quotes the 0.0 with a semicolon. And then what we can do is we can do our volume apply method again, just to make sure that we save it when we go back, just in case we come to a problem and somebody managed to somehow break our menu and try and mess it up. So we're just covering all bases. So now we can go to our reset button, and you can get rid of the 2 on-click events, add one of the click events, add our menu controller, go to the function, go menu controller, and we're just going to choose the reset button, and it needs a string, so we're just going to call this audio like we wanted or like we specified. Now if I don't maximize on play, you can see that now I can adjust the value to maybe 0.9, hit apply, our little box appears in the bottom. You can see that it changed up here. What I can do is I can press reset, so it will bring it up and it'll set it back to 1. I could then set it down to 0.1, press back, it would take us back to the original menu, and you can see that it's set back to close to 0.1. So the only thing left for us to do, and open up the options menu before, and we'll click on the sound button. We'll go to the drop down, and we'll add 2 new on-click events. We'll add the options menu container, which is itself, and we'll set that to false. Then we're going to add the sound dialog menu and set that equal to true. So in this case now, you can see that when we click on the sound, we can do that. That can be 0.5. We'll go back, go to options, go sound, and we can always reset, go back, change it however we need. And now we've got this basic setup done, we can then go and edit our graphics and gameplay as well. So now we're going to be looking at creating our gameplay menu, which is going to have our controller sensitivity and invert Y. It's going to have the same options, and it will even have a controls options that we can click on to show some basic controls. So what we can do is take our sound dialog menu, we'll duplicate that. I'm going to get rid of the old one here, and we've still got one in the background, and we're going to call this our gameplay dialog menu. We'll open that up. The top text can be just our gameplay settings. We can just scale that out if we wish, put that back to the center. Then in this case, we can keep all our buttons the same. We'll put our slider up to the top, and we're just going to move this up. We're going to change this volume slider to our controller sensitivity slider, or we'll rename that to our, I'll just call that to sends slider value, and then our sends text. So what I'm going to do is call this controller sensitivity, and what I'll do is I will just scale this down, so now we've got it on a sort of double row. In this case, with controller sensitivity, you need to do this in how you want it to realistically work, because controller sensitivity or mouse sensitivity or whatever you want it to be is very dependent on the system that you're using. So when I did this, I was using Rewired, so you could set that between an integer value between 1 and 8 as much as you want, but in this you could change mouse speed, whatever you may be. You need to maybe look online to do it, but I'm showing you the core example of how this works. So for this, we could put it from a start value of 1, because maybe the sensitivity needs to start at 1, goes all the way to 8. We can set it as a whole number, or we can maybe by default have our sensitivity as a value of 4. We can set our slider value just to 4, because that's what we might want by default. Now we can right click on our dialog menu, choose UI, and just choose toggle. We'll pull that toggle up, and we're going to call this our invert Y toggle. And what we can do is we can scale this whole thing up a little bit. I'm going to open up my toggle, grab the background of the item, and I'm just going to scale that up too. And then I'm going to open up the check mark and also scale that to the bounds of this box too. So we have a big check mark like that. I'm going to get rid of the label because I don't want that. Then I'm going to go inside the sensitivity slider and grab the text. I'm just going to duplicate that because it's Text Mesh Pro. And I'm just going to drag it up into our invert Y. I'm just going to pull this down here. Just going to have it in line with my other. I'm just going to call this one invert Y. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this actually out of the box, grab my actual toggle itself. I might just scale the bounding in slightly, and I'm just going to pull this out and make sure it's in line with the rest of my objects. Then I can add the text back in, and we can just call this invert Y text. We could just set this to back left, just so that it's in line with our other, and then we can have a box which unticks and ticks. Now, for our invert Y toggle, we can just make sure that its current is on is false, because we might not want that to happen quite yet. Then what we can do is we can take, say, the back button as an example. We can just duplicate that, put that above 2, and we can just call this our controls button. We can put that up here too, and we can just rename that to maybe controls. And then I'll put 2 arrows. Maybe I'll scale this out slightly. So now we have options for our controller sensitivity, inverting the Y, and controls that we can make here, along with the same things that we had before. Now we can open up our menu controller again, and then we can create some variables for our volumes, for our gameplay settings. So square brackets, serialized field, private text. So we can set this to our controller sensitivity text value. Set that equal to null, and then in square brackets private slider, and we can just have this as our controller sen slider. Set that equal to null. What we can do is put another serialized field and say private integer, and we can just call this our default sensitivity, and we can set that equal to something like 4. Then I'll show you the example of being able to actually put this into a variable if we need to use this another time. So we can just write a public integer. We can just call this main controller sensitivity. We'll set that equal to 4 too, because this might be a variable that we use to access from other scripts if we need to remember that whatever it's set, if we need to change it at one point. Like I said that you could do for the volume. Then we need to do something for our toggle. So we'll add square brackets, and then we'll just have serialized field again, say private toggle, and then have invert y toggle, set that equal to null. But again, you've got to remember that we're using the Text Mesh Pro, so I need to just copy this variable here and make sure that our sensitivity text that we're going to select is a Text Mesh Pro item. Now below our volume, we can have another public void. We can have this as set controller sensitivity and have that as a float sensitivity with 2 brackets below. Now remember, our sensitivity was actually an integer. To use a dynamic on-click event, when we change the slider, we update it, it needs to be a float value, it can't be an integer. So we're going to have to convert from float to int to make this work. So this is why I needed that variable that we created. So we'll call this main controller sensitivity is equal to the math f dot round to int, and then we're going to say in brackets is sensitivity. That's why I set that controller slider to actually a whole number in the inspector, because it's going to expect a whole number. So we're going to create it into an integer for us so we can accept it into that variable. Then we're going to say that our controller sensitivity text value, and then we want to say controller sensitivity text dot value dot text is equal to the sensitivity dot toString in brackets in quotes, and we're just going to have a 0, and that's going to set our controller sensitivity for us. And now what we want to do is, we can't do it quite as easily with the toggle box to do the inversion, so I'm just going to do that in the apply. So we're going to be able to apply both the sensitivity and whether we want to invert the actual object itself. So we can say public void gameplay apply, and then 2 curly brackets below, and we'll say that if invert y toggle dot is on, that would mean it's true, so that it's currently ticked. Then we'll say PlayerPrefs dot set int, open brackets, master invert y comma 1. So that just means that it is currently at a value of 1. So a boolean that when we set something true or false is a 1 or a 0. So 1 is true, 0 is false. So we can read that another time. And then we'll write an else, and we'll say that PlayerPrefs dot set int, and then we'll say that the master invert y in quotes, so that's the file that we want to save it in, and we'll say comma 0, so that means it's false if it's not actually true when we press apply. Then what we can do to save our controller sensitivity, we say PlayerPrefs dot set float, and then we can say this is a file of master sensitivity, have that as common as our main controller sensitivity, because that's how we wanted to save our volume, because we're going to put it into that. And then we can do our start coroutine, and we'll do our confirmation box with a semicolon. And remember, again, like before, an invert y has to be done with depends what type of controller you're using, what input method you're using. But in here, then you could do to invert the y depending on the solution that you're going to use, and then not invert in this case. So when you apply, you save it and you do something there. And so we can go back into Unity. We can go onto our controller sensitivity slider. It's currently at set volume because it was just a duplicate of the previous thing. We go to menu. We can go and set it to the set controller sensitivity, which is a dynamic float. Then we can leave the invert like it was. The reset, we will need to create a new bit of script. It will turn itself off. It will make sure the options menu appears. And in this case, we don't want it to be volume apply. We can make this the gameplay apply. And then on the apply button, we'll check that it does the right thing. So when it applies, we're going to do the menu and we're going to do the gameplay apply. And then on the reset, we'll go back into our script, onto our reset here. And then we'll say that if menu type is equal to our gameplay, then below here, what we can do is our controller sensitivity text value dot text is equal to our default sensitivity dot toString, and we'll add the 0 in quotes and brackets. Then we'll say our controller sensitivity slider dot value is equal to our default sensitivity. Then we'll say our main controller sensitivity is equal to our default sensitivity. We can say the invert y toggle dot is on is then equal to false, and we can choose the gameplay apply method. So we're just going to set everything to its default value and then make sure that we save that, just to make sure that everything's working as it should. So we'll go to our reset, we'll check that it's looking for the reset button, so we'll just change this to gameplay, press save. We need to make sure that on our menu controller we add our controller sensitivity text. So if we open up the slider, we add the slider value there, and then we add the actual slider itself here. We can add the invert Y toggle to that object slot there. So now what we can do is press play, and you can see that when I adjust the value, it goes from a value of 8 to a value of 2. We can press Y to invert, we can hit apply. You can see that master invert Y is 1, master sensitivity is 2. We could set that all the way back, we could set that to 6, untick that, press apply. You can see that master invert Y is now 0 and the master sensitivity is 6. If we just have those as true and we set those back to default, you'll notice that the confirmation happened. We've set it to false, otherwise. Now if say we set that to 7 and invert it and we press back, it's going to save it as 1 and 7. And then so in whichever way that you choose to, if you choose to invert Y, you need to find the code to make that happen. Controller sensitivity, you need to set however your input would work. And we can set a control screen which you could just pop out something which is an image with the controls that are on. And you can do it in exactly the same way by selecting your controls button and adding some on-click events to hide this and show something else. So I won't show that because it would be just retreading on old ground. In our last thing that we're going to show here, we can hide this object there. We can go onto our options main menu here. We can click on the drop down. We can go to gameplay. You can see that the gameplay button has nothing. We can add 2 things to that. Gameplay, we can add itself, which is the options menu container. Set that game object to turn off, and we're going to set the gameplay dialog menu set active to true. So now when we press play, we can go to options, we can go to gameplay, we have our options there, we can press back, and go to sound, and we can do similar sort of things, going to and from, back and forth, and we just need to look at the graphics next. So now what we're going to look at is the actual graphics section, which is probably the most complicated of all of the sections. And of course, they can be more complicated if you added more settings. But now what we can do is we'll duplicate our gameplay, and I'm just going to make that visible, and I'm going to hide my options. Then what we'll do is I'll go to the gameplay dialog menu. I'm just going to call this graphics dialog menu. And the gameplay settings can be changed to our graphics setting. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of how to do brightness. So brightness, in my case here, it was controlled on my main camera, and of the menu that I uploaded to my Patreon, it's got a brightness script which can changes the brightness between a value of between 0.5 and 2, and this is what we adjust. You could possibly do this with ambient light, you could do this with a shader or something which controls how light or dark, maybe a post-processing, but again I will show you a way to do it, and then you can take this with you and make it as complicated as you would like. I'm just going to call this the brightness sensitivity slider. So this for me was between 0.5 and 1, but we don't want it to be whole numbers, so 0.5 and 1.5. And the default value should be 1. Then we can have our brightness slider value and brightness text, just to keep it consistent. Now what we can do is we can keep the invert Y toggle, which we might want, and then I'm just going to move this over this side here. I'm just going to call this invert Y toggle, and I'm just going to call this my full screen toggle. And for the invert Y text, I'll call it full screen text. I'm just going to name this to full screen, and we can set that to positive or negative. We're going to get rid of the controls button because we don't need that anymore. We can right click on our dialog menu, go to UI and choose dropdown for Text Mesh Pro. So in this case, we're gonna drop the dropdown down and then we're going to call this our resolution dropdown. I'm gonna grab the brightness text, duplicate that, but out of my brightness slider, I'm just gonna call this the resolution text and change this to resolution. Bring that down and put that in line with my drop down box. I'm going to parent that to the resolution drop down box. Just going to bring this up above my buttons. Then we've got that here. Now we can Control D to duplicate that. Then I'm going to pull that new duplicate just below here. And instead of that being the drop down, we're going to call this the quality drop down. Then I'm just going to rename this to quality text. I'm just going to name that to the quality that we will want. If we select our quality drop down, you can see that it has a bunch of options. Option A, B, C. We're going to add another option and we're going to call this option A is going to be renamed to low. Then the second for option B is going to be medium, high, and ultra. This is what we're going to change. So if we go to edit project settings and we go to quality, you can see that we have very low, which we could delete, low, medium, high. We'll get rid of very high and we'll keep it on ultra, so we'll have 4. You can add as many as you want. So that is going to be our drop down that we're going to be able to set. Without a resolution, we can, well, we technically could specify all the different resolutions that we may have based on our resolution drop down, but that'll be a hell of a lot of resolutions. So it's easier to find it automatically based on what you might want to set. So we can do this ourselves within script. So now in our script, what we want to do is we want to create a few different variables to control what we're going to do. So under here, underneath our toggle settings, I'm just going to have this and call it the graphics settings. And then I'm going to do it for the brightness. So the brightness should be a serialized field, private slider again, and we'll call this our brightness slider. Set that equal to null, just like the rest. Serialized field, private, text mesh pro underscore text, and then set that equal to our brightness text value. Set that equal to null. So we're going to say serialized field, private, float, and we'll call this our default brightness. Set that equal to 1. Then underneath here, we're going to need to store in a variable what our current quality level is, our current brightness level is, and our whether it's full screen or not. So we can say private integer underscore quality level. So this is going to be my variable that's holding that data. Then I'm going to have private bool is full screen as another, and then private float underscore brightness level. And then we will do resolution as a separate example. So now underneath our gameplay, we could create a method which is public void set brightness. Have that as float brightness, and what we can do is we can say that our brightness level, so underscore brightness level is just the data that we want to be able to store to save for later. So we'll just set that equal to brightness, and then I will say brightness text value dot text is equal to brightness dot toString, and then in brackets in quote 0.0. Then below here we need to be able to save we need to be able to set our whether it's full screen or not. So public void set full screen, have that as a boolean, set that equal to is full screen, which is our parameter, and then we can say that is full screen is equal to is full screen. So in some cases, the brightness level we can set on demand if we wanted to. We could set the full screen on demand if we wanted to, but I'm going to save that to the apply button. But we can also do public void, this is to make this as set quality as another method, and have that as an integer, our quality index that we're going to use. So in this case, we'll say underscore quality level is equal to our quality index. So like I say, these are adjusting based on the actions that we do to be able to, when we pull the slider, do the toggle, do whatever, do the drop down, we're going to update this variable so we can save it later when we press apply. So under here, we could essentially do another public void, graphics apply, 2 brackets, then 2 curly brackets below, and say that PlayerPrefs dot set float to save our brightness. Then we can put in brackets, in quotes, master brightness as the file that we'll create, put a comma, and then we're going to have the brightness level, which is that variable that we created before. And then if we wanted to, we could change our brightness with your post-processing or whatever it is that you want to change the brightness. So that's when it could be applied. Then PlayerPrefs dot set int is going to be in quotes master quality. After the comma, we'll put the quality level. So this is when we can set our quality level based on the settings. So in this case, we can say quality settings dot set quality level in brackets and then our underscore quality level. So in this case, it will actually, when we hit apply, it will change the quality setting that we currently have to whatever index we just changed it to based on our dropdown. Now we can do PlayerPrefs dot set int, can have in quotes master full screen, then we can have a comma, then we can have open up brackets. This is technically a different way that you can save a boolean value. It's a slightly shorter way. We can say that is full screen, so that's our variable that we saved, whether it was a true or false, 1 or not. We can have a question mark to compare whether it's 1:0. We can add a semicolon on the end, so that saves whether it's a true or false, 1 or 0. And then we can say screen dot full screen equals underscore is full screen. And then again, we can do our start coroutine, and then we can choose our confirmation box. So when we apply the graphics, we're going to be able to save what boolean it is, we'll set it, we'll save the quality, we'll set it, and we'll save the brightness. And if we had a way to do that, you can find this entire menu system on my Patreon. If you want to support the channel, you can find scripts, complete projects, and so much on there. So thank you so much for watching. What we're going to do is we want to be able to get the amount of resolutions that we had. So getting to resolution is a lot more complicated than what we've done for previous items. So what we can do under here, underneath our last variable, I'm just going to call this our resolutions dropdown. And I'm just going to create a couple of variables. So I'm going to set a public dropdown. So we need to reference our actual dropdown. And it's going to be our resolution dropdown object. So we're going to have private resolution, and we're going to have this as an array, and we're going to call this resolutions. Now what we need to do is we can do this below here. It's just where we keep everything together. So it's going to be on void start. So we'll do this on the start. We need to find all the resolutions that we need. So what we can do is we can say that resolutions is equal to screen dot resolutions. First of all, set resolutions, screen resolutions that we have. We're going to say that resolution dropdown dot clear options, because we need to get rid of whatever's in our current dropdown at the moment, because it had some values that were set there by default. We don't want that anymore, so we can get rid of those. So we want to create a new list which will list all the different types of strings or the different names that we're going to have. So we'll say list string, and we'll set this to a name of options. We'll set that equal to a new list as a string, and we'll just have 2 brackets, a semicolon. We want to create a local variable for in the current resolution index. We'll set that equal to 0, because we need to actually be able to get the index of any particular resolution, because we'll have a list of a load. We can't just specify by name. So we need to search through the length of our array to find how many different resolutions that we have. So we'll say for, and then when I press double tab, I get a basic for loop. So I can say for int I equals 0, and if I is less than our resolutions dot length, and then we can say I plus plus, and then inside our curly brackets, we can say that string and option is that a local variable we're just going to create for now is equal to our resolutions with a lowercase, square brackets I dot width plus, then we can add a quote, we can put an X, and we can space that out. So we're just going to say that the resolution should be the resolution that we found, the width of the resolution, plus, and we're just putting an X as a string value. And then we're going to say that the resolutions in square brackets I dot height, make sure we have a plus after that so we can keep this string together. So it's going to be the width string, the height string with that in between. Then we'll say options dot add, and then we'll add this just option, which was that local variable you just created. And then under here, we'll say that if resolutions in square brackets I dot width is equal to screen dot width and resolutions dot in square brackets I height is equal to the screen dot height, then under here we're just going to say that our current resolution index equals to, so it just means that we're going to get all the resolutions, we're going to clear the options, we'll create a list of options that we currently have, we'll be able to search through the length of the array, we'll be able to put into a string the width and the height of those. We're going to check to see if the resolutions that we found is equal to our screen width or height, and then we'll set that to our current resolution that we want to choose. So that does it on start to find everything and place them into that box and get it ready for us to use. And then underneath our last set of brackets underneath the for loop, our resolution dropdown dot add options, open brackets, and then it's going to be the options that we want to display. Then we're going to say our resolution dropdown dot value is equal to the current resolution index. We also want to say resolution dropdown dot refresh shown value, which is another method that we need to call. You need to make sure that your dropdown is textmeshpro underscore dropdown is actually set the resolution based on that dropdown. So we need to write a public void set resolution, and then in brackets we're going to say int resolution index. Then we'll have two curly brackets below there and say that resolution with a capital, and then we'll have resolution which is lowercase. So this is just going to be our local variable for the resolution that we want, and that's going to be equal to our resolutions that we found, but we want to specify the resolution index from this parameter. So we'll look for based on all the resolutions that we found, but we're going to put the parameter into there, which will be the value that we've selected to find which is the one that we want to put on. Then what we want to do is say screen dot set resolution in brackets resolution, because this is our local variable, dot width, comma, resolution dot height, comma, screen dot full screen in this case, just to make sure that these are the three parameters that it requires. And now what we want to do is go to our menu controller. We want to add our brightness slider, our brightness text, which is in this box. We can go to our apply button and make sure that it's got the menu controller on, and we can choose the graphics apply, but I've spelt that method wrong, but that doesn't matter. We can go to the back button, which turns itself off, turns the menu options on, and we can also do the graphics apply. Then what we could do is go to our menu controller, add our resolution dropdown. So then what we need to do is select our quality dropdown, make sure that we add an onChanged event, add the menu controller here, go to the menu controller and choose set quality. We can choose the resolution and make sure that we have the menu controller, and we set that to set resolution. For the full screen toggle, we need to add a click event, add the menu controller, do the function, menu controller, and we can choose set full screen. And for the brightness slider, we just need to make sure it's got menu controller, and you add set brightness from the dynamics at the top as well. Now, if I don't maximize the play and we test this out, then we can see if we set the object, so the quality to ultra, we're going to cause it full screen, and we're going to set our brightness to 1.5. When we hit apply, you can see that down here, master brightness is 1.5. Our master quality, which it starts at 0 for low, medium and high, and then it's 1, so it is true. And now what we want to do is be able to reset the actual values that we've got for the graphics option. So we need to go back up to the top and go to where our graphics settings were. Below here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a serialized field private, and then I'm going to do the textmeshpro underscore dropdown as our quality dropdown, because we want to reset that, and then a square bracket serialized field private full screen toggle, like so, but make sure that's set as toggle. Then we can keep everything like this for now. We can go down to our method, which is our reset button. We can have an if statement here, which says that if the menu type is equal to, we'll say graphics at this point. Then we'll have two curly brackets below and say that this is where we could potentially reset the brightness value on the actual object, or the thing that would change it. But to change the slider, we'll just do the brightness slider dot value equals the default brightness. Then we will do the brightness text value dot text is equal to the default brightness dot toString, and then in brackets quote 0.0 with a semicolon. Then we want to do our quality settings, so we'll say that the quality dropdown dot value is equal to 1, so it went not 1, so it went 0, 1, 2, 3, so 1 was medium, so it'd be our second option. So that's probably where we want to be if we want to reset it to default, but you can choose, you can set that to whatever you want. Then we can set quality settings dot set quality level, open brackets, and then we'll do the same thing, we'll set that to 1 as well. Then we'll say that full screen toggle dot is on is equal to false, and we'll also say our screen dot full screen is equal to false as well, because that's just going to change our variable. That's going to change what our object displays in our UI. We'll change the actual screen, and now we want to be able to reset our resolution if we've actually changed it to something we didn't want. So we're going to set as a local variable resolution. We'll set this as a name of current resolution, set that equal to screen dot current resolution with a semicolon, and then we'll say that screen dot set resolution, open brackets, is the current resolution dot width, comma, current resolution dot height, comma, screen dot full screen with a semicolon. But we also then need to set what our box should display, or our dropdown should display. So we can say resolution dropdown dot value equals the resolutions dot length. At the end we can just put graphics apply. I mean, I did spell that wrong, so I'm just leaving it like that for now. But remember that the resolution.value is, we'd imagine that the default resolution for our current screen should be the last resolution in every single resolution we get. So say my monitor is a maximum resolution of 1920 by 1080. That would be the maximum length or the final value in our array. So that's what we're going to set our drop down to. We can go to the reset to default button. It's got the menu controller on it as an on click, and we can just change this to graphics, and we can save that. We'll make sure we go to our menu controller and realize that we need the quality drop down and we need the full screen toggle. These won't actually change unless we build out the game, so this is something that we would have to do. So you can see that my default resolution, I built the game out in a little windowed mode, and you can see that my resolution is set to, I can set it to ultra, I'll set my resolution down to 1200, and I'll put full screen and I'll press apply, and you can see it like so. Now if I reset to default, you can see it reset to medium, unticked full screen, and reset to my highest resolution that my monitor can go. So the last thing that we need to do is go to our options menu, go to graphics, and make sure that options menu is disabled, and then we can change this from the new game panel to our graphics dialog menu, which should be game object and set active to true. Then I'm going to get rid of the graphics panel there. I'm going to close it all up. I'm going to make sure that I enable my first main menu, so I'll press play now. We've got the new game, which you can choose to start a new game if we wish. We've got load game, which if we had something saved, we could do that. We can press no. We can exit if we wanted to. We can go to options. We can go to graphics. We can press back. We can go to sound. We can adjust that. Gameplay, adjust inversions if we want to. Go back, change different options for graphics, quality, gameplay, and all the things that we expected to do from there, and it will save every time we move back and forward from there. And now what I'm going to show you is how to do initialization, or to be able to take the things that you've saved previously and be able to throw those into an initialization phase. So as soon as you load your menu, we need to load all those settings, or when we load our game, you need to load those settings that you might want to use them at some point. So we're going to right click, we're going to go create C#, and we're going to call this load prefs. We're going to create a new object, empty game object, and we're just going to call this load prefs 2. We're going to add our script there. We'll open up in Visual Studio. We're going to create a bunch of variables which are going to reference all the things that we previously had. So to make this easier for everybody, I've just created some subheadings to make it easier. So the general settings that I'm going to have square bracket serialized field, private bool, can use, and I'm going to set that equal to false, because this is going to be able to say a tick box to whether we should load or not load preferences. So I'm going to have another square bracket serialized field and say private menu controller, so the script which is the menu controller which we wanted to access, and then have this as a name of menu controller. We need to add at the top using Unity engine.ui. Then in the volume settings, we're going to have, like before, square brackets serialized field. We're going to have private, and then in our case up here we're going to also need using TMP Pro, and we're going to give this, so this is going to be private text mesh pro underscore tech volume text value, set that equal to null. Then we're going to have another square brackets serialized field, private slider, and have that as our volume slider, set that equal to null as well. With the brightness, we can go into this script and just pretty much copy our variables that we created, so the slider and the text value we'll paste in here. So we'll do the same for the quality drop down that we wanted. So the quality drop down can be here. Same for the full screen. We'll grab the controller sensitivity and the invert Y toggle just here. So now we're going to put this on awake. So void awake. So this runs before any other method in the game, before our start method, any method. This will run before everything else. So it's good to use it for initialization. So now we can say if can use is true, then we'll have two curly brackets below. So if at any point that we can tick this as soon as before we start, just to make sure that if we need for debugging purposes, we don't want to load prefs, we can do that. But now, to check whether we actually have something saved, what we can do is we can say that if PlayerPrefs.hasKey, we can start by doing the volume. So remember what we created before, if hasKey, and it was master volume. So if that file is available, then we should be able to load that file and do something with it. So we're going to write a float and call this our local volume, set that equal to our PlayerPrefs.getFloat, so this allows us to get the float from the master volume. And if you do need to check any of the names, you can check it in your script, look for what you originally did to apply, so your master volume, so you make sure that you copy that correctly into here if you need it. Then what we can do, seeing as though we've saved, so we've got the volume into a local variable which we can use now. So in this case, we can say volume text value dot text is equal to our local volume dot toString, and in brackets in quote 0.0, like we pretty much did here. So in this case, we also need to do volume slider dot value is equal to the local volume, and the audio listener dot volume is equal to our local volume. So it's pretty much the same thing, but in this instance we're just checking to see if we have saved something, and if we have, we will do something. If not, what we can do is, to make sure that nothing is the issue thereafter, we can have an else statement and say that if that's not the case, we can just say menu controller dot reset button. And we can just put, and remember the reset button, we had to pass in a parameter, and we can just call it audio. So it will just set it to the defaults, just in case that there was some discrepancy somewhere. We'll stay inside the can use, but in this instance, we're going to say that if PlayerPrefs.hasKey, and then in quotes, we'll say master quality. Then we'll have two curly brackets below and say integer local quality, because it was going to be just an integer value, set that equal to PlayerPrefs dot get int, open brackets in quotes, the master quality with a semicolon. So now what we can do is say quality dropdown dot value is equal to our local quality of what we've loaded, and then the quality settings dot set quality level in brackets is the local quality, so the one that we'd saved. And again, you could write an else statement to say that we can reset the graphics if any of that issue arose. Now under here we could say that if PlayerPrefs.hasKey, and then we can say master full screen, but we might need to check that we've spelt it correctly, so we'll check, we'll grab that from over there, and if we have that file, we can do integer local full screen is equal to PlayerPrefs.getInt, and in brackets in quotes master full screen just from here. Of course, you could make these specific strings into variables which you could affect in the inspector. Then in this case, we can actually say if local full screen is equal to 1, so it would be true. We can say that screen dot full screen is equal to true, and our full screen toggle dot is on is also equal to true. Then we can have an else statement, which again, we can copy these two lines and specify if it's not, it must be false. So they're both equal to false. So we're just running through everything that we've just done and being able to load those straight into those buttons and those text boxes to be able to make sure that they are equal to the things that we want. And now I've pasted this in to make it easier and quicker for you to see. So now we're saying if has key as master brightness, we've got a local brightness, we're getting the flow of master brightness, putting it in the text box and the slider value. And then here we also would want to change the brightness of the actual game with however we want to do that. And again, I've added another check to see if we've got the master sensitivity. If we have, we can load the flow, and the controller sensitivity text.text is equal to the local sensitivity. Then the value is equal to the local sensitivity, and then the actual main controller sensitivity is the local sensitivity rounded to an int. And the very last thing to check that you could check is if you've inverted your mouse, and you can say that if the get integer is equal to 1, it would be true, and then otherwise it would be false. So now we've got this nicely written out, we can go back into Unity. So we need to link everything up here. So we can add the menu controller, which is just the menu controller game object, and link everything up based on what we'd done previously. So you can just go into your individual settings pop-outs and just add everything that you need. So now I've linked everything up, we can make sure that can use is ticked. And you can see in my player preferences down here that my master volume would be 0.8, my invert Y is 1, so it was true, my sensitivity was 6, the brightness was 1.3, the quality was a setting 3, it was in full screen mode, so now when we press play, we can go to options, graphics, you can see it's 1.3, it was full screen, it was on setting 3 which was ultra, can press back, go to sound, it was 0.8 like we suggested, and controller sensitivity was 6, and it was invert Y. So what I did is I added in my own font, which was something called Railway Regular, which you can get any fonts from online or your computer itself. As you can see down here, I created a couple of sprites, one which is a boxy sprite and one which is a long sprite, which will replace what I've currently got in mind, which these were just created in Photoshop at very specific sizes. So this was 512 by 1080, and this one of 2048 by 2048, and I've just got them with a transparent background. So if we want to be able to use a different font with stuff with TextMesh Pro, we want to go to Window, TextMesh Pro, on Asset Creator, drag our text in there, we can keep everything by default, say Generate Alpha, then we can just save as, and we can just grab our button and then just replace our font in here. So then we've got a brand new style. So what else we can do is the background UI, which is the backdrop to this, we can just add my long decayed option here, and you can see that there. I can just scale that out slightly and say we want to make a button sound that when we click on an object it will actually do something. So on a click event that we might want to click and make a sound effect, so we can add another click event. I've just got here, which is a metallic click sound. I can just drag that sound into my hierarchy over here, and it'll say UI click metallic. So I don't want to play on away because I only want that to play when I want it. And I go to my new game button and I drag that audio source into that slot. I can just do there, audio source, and I can just choose play. So when we click that button, it will make a sound, and we can do that for every single button we want. You'll be able to add different events, different clicks. You might be able to just hear when I click that I got a click sound, and we can go between our options and do whatever we need. And be sure to comment if you think you can improve on certain parts, and we can share it with the community so we can make things better and better and better. You'll be able to get this entire project on my Patreon. I'll upload this new version with some of the new features which are newer than what is currently on there, and you can check that out. Come and join me on Discord if you want to chat. Check out my awesome assets on the Unity store, and thank you so much for watching. So thank you And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Cheers.